Cool. There we go. So hopefully we are all seeing the presentation view. Someone please tell me if you're seeing more than you expected to see. Oh, that's always good to see. So just a brief introduction. So as I said before, today's session is on Te Tōtara, the Workforce Capability Development that came about through the New Zealand Libraries Partnership Program as one of the sustainability assets that we had asked to be done. I am very happy and very proud to say I am joined by two beautiful wahine today. I have Siren Deluxe, who comes from Kapiti Coast District Libraries, who's the manager of the district libraries and operations. And I'm very thankful to see she's come back. Apparently I didn't scare her off last time. Amanda Bond, who's one of the facilitators for services to schools within National Library. So they will be the two doing most of the presenting today. I'm just here to give you a bit of background. So when they come to talk about it from their perspectives, you have a much more deeper understanding of the process. Right, so Te Tōtara, what exactly is it? So it was a framework that was designed to help individuals working within the library sector to think about their current levels of knowledge, to identify current areas of growth, hopefully to strengthen and get a little bit more diversity within the library and information sector workforce. Now, yes, you might be thinking, but doesn't Lianza already have the bodies of knowledge? So this is not to replace those bodies of knowledge. This is to work within a complementary manner. So this is something you could work with your HR departments, so your human resource departments within your organizations. So why do we need it? So basically, it's for the long-term sustainability of the sector. I think we're all aware of the struggles that we have within our sector. We need a knowledgeable, flexible, and diverse working force. I think we're all aware of how flexible and how much change is constantly happening within the library sector. Even I've been amazed as long as I've been working within libraries, just the sheer degree of change that we've had to experience. And it's to support more inclusive, resilient and thriving communities, as it's our communities that are the main reason that why we're here and who we serve. It's to give us a baseline list of skills and behaviours and attitudes. Think of attitudes. I hate this term, but they always refer to them as soft skills. A lot of our technical skills we can learn through other avenues, but if you're not the right kind of person with those appropriate soft skills, libraries may not be the place for you. And it's using a capability framework to give clarity to areas. Plus, it's something that can be used across the sector wide. So it's not just within your organisation. It's something that we're looking at to have recognition across the sector. So if you leave one place and go to another place, you're perfectly aware of what it is that you may need or areas that you want growth in. So it was developed with guidance from Lianza, so they were asked to participate, hence me saying it's complementary to the bodies of knowledge. It's not there to replace them. Te Raupu Whakahau, the Pacific Information Management Network, so we're trying to get that diversity as a part of that. There was also input gathered from over 100 representatives, so we're talking from other sectors within libraries, so not just those organisations. We're looking at special libraries, school librarians, where possible. And they also searched for and got collaborative input from ALIA, the Australian Library Association, and they approached CLIP to look at their capability frameworks that they had in place to see how they could integrate those within Te Tōtara as well. So what does it look like? So this is a breakdown of Te Tōtara. So it is broken down into 4 pieces, and I'll give you a brief overview of those. And I'm sure that from what I can remember, which is digging a bit deep for me, I know Amanda and Siren will be going over some of this stuff as well. So the 4 parts are Ngā Paiaka, which is the roots. So those are the values behind the system. Then we have Te Tiwai, the trunk. We're looking at the ethical parts of our jobs. Then we're moving up into the branches, and this is probably the meatiest part of Te Tōtara, which is Ngā Ruha, and that's looking at the various capability groups. So those are at the skill sets that you'll need within libraries. And then as everything, you need to have that reflective component in there, because you do need to reflect and evaluate where you're going or how you think you're meeting these. So that's why we have the taurauhinga as well. So just to give you a bit of a deeper look, So here are the roots. So I talked about the values. So these are the values that help drive us in what we do in our organisations and our institutions. And you can see there we also have Te Tiritia Waitangi, which is a guiding document within New Zealand, and trying to add in that Te Ao Māori perspective as well. So these are some of these values I'm sure some of you are already familiar with. So rangatiratanga, kotahitanga, manakitanga, kaitiakitanga, ukaipōtanga, whanaungatanga, and pukangatanga. So some of these you're probably aware of, some maybe you've never come across, but I think a lot of us are getting to know these values a lot more. So as we move up our te tōtara, we then move into the TY, which is the ethics and contextual space. So librarianship and information sector values and ethics. And I think we could agree these pretty much apply to whatever sector you're in. There's not a difference in the space. It's more the clientele and maybe how we apply them. And this is looking at the data, information, and knowledge within our sector as well. So we move further up our te tōtara, and now we get to ngā ruha, which are the branches. So you can see here, this is the much meatier space. So this is looking at the skills, and it is broken down into different parts within this. So you don't have to look at all of them at once. You can just choose to focus on a particular area that you may feel you're a bit lacking in or that you want to focus on. And then, as I said before, we move into te rauhinga, which is the reflection and evaluation. So this is just a good way to check where you're at. Ensure you're meeting those goals or those aspirations that you have planned. So the vision of a capable library workforce is for kaimahi to take responsibility for their own cycle of learning. So this is the opportunity for both the organisation and the individuals to work within this space. So once you've worked through those, part of that process is that they had developed some capability levels that apply to all of those areas. So we have 4. So when you see a lot of the documentation, it's focused more towards the last 3, because the first one is a foundational base that a lot of us have, and we may not even realise that we have it. So that's why we start with kōrero, which is around the discussion, the foundational part. And as your knowledge grows or as your skill set grows, you could then move into mōhio, which is where you're starting to feel comfortable with what it is that you know and what it is that you've learned or what you're applying. From mōhio, we move into marama. So we have a deeper understanding. We feel real confident. We're a little bit more happy to kind of share and work with others within our organisation. And then lastly, we move to matau, which is the wisdom capable. So that's when essentially you are considered an expert. And I know a lot of us suffer with giving that title to ourselves as being experts in our areas because we are a very humble profession. But there are a lot of experts, and I'm sure there are a lot of experts within this webinar today. So that's just a very brief whistle-stop breakdown of Te Tōtara. And I'm now going to hand it over to Siren. I did get that right. I got it wrong last time, so I'm just double checking. And just bear with me one moment. I will just bring up Siren's presentation.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko inga rangi mā ko te rana te whakapapa mai. Engari no whanganui a tara au, ko porirua toku kāinga tuturu. Ko Pukurua Bay te whenua tupu. He te kai whakahiri nā whakahaere o nā whare pukapuka arohi. Ko Siren Deluxe, taku ingoa. Tēnā tātou katoa. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk about Te Tōtara. To give you some context, I am not a librarian by training or experience. My background is in fine art, museums, and heritage practice and management. I have been grafted into libraries for coming up 3 years now, which has been a massive growth period for me in the GLAM profession and as a people manager. I currently lead the customer service and operations team for Kapiti District Libraries. I have 6 permanent staff reporting to me and 8 casuals. My hub leads in turn have 3 to 8 people reporting to them, So as a team, we represent a total of 30 people. However, our libraries also have a programs and outreach and a collections and digital team, all equally involved in our library's involvement and adoption of Te Tōtara. So I want to tell you about why we have adopted Te Tōtara, and I apologise for how dull this next slide is. At Kapiti Libraries, we want to have an engaged, enthusiastic and joyful workforce. We know through annual surveys such as Gallup Employee Satisfaction Survey that we have a lot of work to do to achieve this goal. One of the consistent pieces of frustrated feedback I have heard from staff since starting here is that in our workplace, there is no clear pathway for personal development or professional progression. There is a lack of appreciation for their specialist skills, no time to engage in training, and a lack of clarity about what skills are needed or valued in the contemporary library space. And some of our staff simply don't feel seen by their managers. The Q11 and Q12 question on the screen is from Gallup, and it's a snapshot of the 2 learning and develop measurements used by Gallup survey to gauge staff satisfaction. Our scores on these 2 fronts pointed glaringly to the need for us to improve. Te Tōtara Library Workforce Capability Framework will help address several of these issues. Our personal development reviews have been irregular in the past and using a generic council form, which has not spoken to the heart of librarianship. The background of how Kapiti District Libraries got involved with Te Tōtara is that our Library and Cultural Services Manager, Ian Littleworth, engaged with Inspire Group when they were in the latter stages of consolidating Te Tōtara. So this is really a shout out to him for seeing an opportunity in negotiating our workplace as a pilot for the application of this framework. Initially, a select group of Kapiti Library staff met with Inspire Group and went through the various phases and iterations of workbooks. Initially, we fed back to Inspire Group that the workbooks were too detailed, overwhelming in size, and simply took too much time to complete. However, the metaphor of the tree, the multiple branches, the holistic life cycle of the tree, including the roots and the fallen leaves, really engaged staff and gave visibility to the complexity of our sector. When we were confident that Te Tōtara was a good tool fit for our needs, library leadership planned a staff away day to introduce our whole workforce to Te Tōtara. The goal was to familiarise them with the tree chart that Carl has shared with you and to have a deep kōrero about the roots. Inspire Group and our library's Māori advisor led that introductory session. Around the same time, to support the uptake of Te Tōtara and to be ready to support developmental aspirations, library management made structural changes to the front of house roster to give free time to staff to weekly invest effort in their development. Now, like many of you, the Kapiti Libraries sit within a council, and the council has its own mantra of values. Our council's values are caring, effective, and dynamic. These are the values staff have become familiar with over many years. And within our council communications, these values have no te reo translation. So here is my first big reflection for you. My first pearl of wisdom is that the step from caring, effective, and dynamic to 7 Māori values, rangatiratanga, kotahitanga, manakitanga, pukinatanga, whanaungatanga, ukaipotanga, and kaitiakitanga was a big step. And it was a philosophical challenge to the workplace. I noticed that during and after the all-staff Te Tōtara workshop, people were avoiding using the Māori words in conversation. One of my highly engaged staff proactively made little signs of the values and the definitions and stuck them all around the place to help everybody learn these words. My reflection is, if you have staff who are reluctant to say kia ora or tēnā koe or ka kite anō, if you have staff who wince when you start a meeting with a karakia, or if your waiata sounds depressing, you're going to have your work cut out for you to have staff adopt first these words, and then secondly, the nuance and richness of the Te Tōtara values. In retrospect, we naively assumed a lot when we introduced Te Tōtara. We had assumptions about staff language capability and their willingness to adopt and integrate Mātauranga Māori. There is arguably an assumption in the whole Te Tōtara framework that an essentially Eurocentric library structure and organisation of knowledge can grow out of Te Ao Māori values. My personal reflection is that Kapiti Libraries went straight to sharing the roots before even considering the ground. I would suggest that anyone adopting this framework should start with the ground, Te Tiriti o Waitangi and Te Ao Māori, because as any good gardener knows, you should check the pH and quality of your soil before planting. Practical implementation. This is Kapiti Library's personal iteration of Te Tōtara, which people managers are trialling with staff currently. It is a one-pager. It requires staff to have engaged with the Te Tōtara metaphor and to spend some time meditating on their own skill set and the complexity of the contemporary library. It doesn't take very long, and it's a really positive experience of self-reflection. My favourite part about this Taku Tōtara worksheet is that staff are asked to self-assess their competency in the following way, which is the next slide, by filling in an empty circle or a moon. The thing with this is that you can assess yourself as kōrero, which is just starting the conversation and considering new ideas. And we found that was one of our feedbacks, that a lot of our staff were at the kōrero phase. And having gone through this worksheet with some staff, that kōrero line isn't even a 25%, it's just a line. We're just coming onto the radar with some of these concepts. But the nice thing about this way of assessing yourself is that it's very non-judgmental and very unthreatening. And it is a really refreshing way to gently recognise areas where there is little growth and acknowledge areas where wisdom has genuinely been achieved. So my revelations for you in conclusion are that Te Tōtara is an excellent resource for having conversations with your staff about their skills and development. If you have not had a regular, dedicated, thoughtful and holistic approach to development of staff in the past, you are going to have staff that look more like these trees than a tōtara tree. But the real beauty of the framework is that it enables people to see themselves and then to share the way they perceive themselves with their managers. And then in turn, the managers can gently suggest pruning or nurturing growth in another area. It also opens up conversations about values, treaty partnership, and identity. Te Tōtara is not perfect, but nothing is perfect, and my opinion that it is that it is great. Over and out, Carla.
Ngā mihi nui, Siren. We're going to take questions after Amanda's done her presentation. So I will hand it over to Amanda. Now, Amanda, do you want me to share your presentation or do you prefer to run that yourself?
I'm happy to share it. Thanks, Carla. Yeah. Kia ora tātou, ko Amanda Bond, toko ingoa, ko Pākehā ahau, hei kai pānui ahau. That's a new one. I'll tell you that in a moment. I tipu aki au ki Hakateri, ki Waipapa aho, e noho ana, I mahi ana o hei kaihua wairi pumanua motu, hei ratonga ki na kura e tipuna, Maotaranga, Aotearoa, no reira tēnā koutou. Hi everyone. I wanted to say that we just added to our pepeha the phrase Hei kai panui aho. So I had to read that because it's a bit new to us, and it means I am a reader. So for us at Services to Schools and the capability team, we really want to encourage people to read. But today we're here to talk about the framework, and Siren, I really appreciated the way you shared so thoughtfully about your practice in using the framework with your colleagues. That was great. My background is a little bit different. I trained to be a teacher of secondary school here in New Zealand and loved being in the classroom. I taught English and social studies and economics and history and all sorts of things, and found the classroom to be a place that was challenging. There's something wonderful about working with teenagers that is incredible and life-giving. While I was doing my teaching training and my teaching practice, a colleague trained to be a teacher librarian, and she asked if she could work with my class, and I saw my class. I was working at Tukaroa High School, and I saw my students who were on the edges of really not being too interested in school. The minute we started inquiry learning just light up. And I thought, I want to be part of this. And so a few years later, I got the opportunity to train in Auckland with some of this, and it just led on to a postgraduate diploma in librarianship. So I found my way into librarianship through passion about the way young people in particular can utilize reading and learning for their own empowerment and their own futures. So that was my background, and I suddenly realized that I wanted to be a school librarian. And when I started to explore what that meant, there was kind of no real understanding of what that was in New Zealand. It was starting to appear in Canada and in Australia. And so someone very helpfully said to me, well, you could do your master's degree. And I was like, I've got 2 small children and a full-time job, and no, thank you. And so I was really lost to know what were some of the things that I should be doing to build into school librarianship. And that's why I've labeled this slide School Librarians Finding Their Place in the Forest, because some things about school librarians in New Zealand today is that they have a real range. There's no such thing as a typical school librarian, just as there's no such thing as a typical librarian of any sort. But for many school librarians, they come from very different backgrounds. I've worked with people who were trained nurses. I worked with an amazing man who was a systems analyst and had come from managing factory operations. I've worked with artists and psychologists and people who have incredibly rich backgrounds. And what I love about Te Tautura, and what I would have found very helpful myself in starting out many years ago, is that Te Tautura describes from the roots right through to the branches, right through to the falling leaves, the attributes of what the work of a librarian is, what the capabilities are for a librarian. And I realized as a teacher, I was bringing some things into this role that enriched it. And there are so many things that people bring to the role of librarianship that aren't necessarily taught in a library school or in a degree. So the other thing I like about Te Tautura when we come and look at it more carefully is that there are no barriers. There are no formal qualifications. You don't have to start with a degree. You don't have to start with anything. It's there. All of these capabilities are so well described that there's no gateway to go through to participate. And of course, where does it come from? It comes from that wonderful for Whakatauki that the totara does not stand alone on the plain, it stands within a great forest. And for many school librarians, they are the only librarian in their organisation. It can be a very lonely place for them. So I just want to share some good news. Just last year, in November, NZEI, which is the Primary Teachers Union, was successful in achieving pay equity for school librarians. And what this did was it acknowledged that school librarians, being a mostly female occupation group, were not being paid in an equitable way for a similar occupation that would be dominated by men. And they actually achieved a huge settlement, which is fabulous. And I'm sure there was much dancing the night they found out about that. It's going to make a big difference for school librarian pay. What school librarians are doing right now is they're looking at something called a matrix. And I did put a tiny URL on the screen if you're interested, but I think Sarah's adding some of these links into the chat. What the matrix does is it describes what a school librarian does and it gives grades. So I've only got on this shot Lib A, Lib B, it also goes to Lib C and Lib D, and it describes what the role's basically about, necessary skills and knowledge, what responsibilities you have, what things you're going to be doing as a librarian. It's very, very clear. And it's a very important document for school librarians right now because they're finding where does their job description relate to these areas, and that's going to help them work out their pay. So like Siren was asking and Carla before, how does Te Totara fit with all of this? Well, what the matrix is doing is it's trying to fit people into a pay scale. What Te Totara does, on the other hand, is it encourages the idea of growth and professional development. So the other thing the matrix has achieved, and the workforce equity pay claim has achieved for school librarians, is they have to have professional development time given to them, the same as all other school employees. And I think Te Totara offers the most amazing opportunity for them to participate in something that describes a whole lot of skills and competencies that relate to librarianship across our sector, librarianship in all sorts of different kinds of libraries. The other lovely thing about Te Totara is that it talks about competency. It talks about capability rather than more than competency. Competency is your skills and your knowledge and your talent, and it's about job descriptions, and it's about what the nuts and bolts of what you're doing. A capability describes your potential as well as where you're at right now. So it's looking at your ability to develop and grow in a really comprehensive way. So there are stages of growth, and I love, just like Siren, I really like the idea of the tree. It's really holistic. So as Carla was showing us, we start with the roots, but we're going to take Siren's advice to start with the soil. I thought that was really great. Thank you, Siren. The roots are really important. Then the trunk and the branches and the falling leaves. But I really like that the progression of the growth is described. So I love that Siren showed you the workbook that they were using, and that there are those progressions from very foundational kōrero. I'm just beginning to have a conversation about some of these things, that my knowledge is a little slither on the moon, perhaps, and not quite even a quarter, right through to being very comfortable and mātau and being wise. So when I started my library career many, many years ago, before Te Totara was available, I sidled up to the people who were in this wisdom area, and I asked them what they were doing in their school libraries. And I was so fortunate that I was part of SLANZA, the School Library Association, and I went to the National Library Services for Schools meetings, and I was able to glean wisdom wisdom from those colleagues. And I think at that mātau level, you're giving back. You're really investing in the growth of other people as well. So like you've seen, this is the whole thing. I won't dwell on this because it's already been described to you. And it's huge. So one of the things that my personal response to Te Taura when I first saw it was, oh my gosh, it's enormous. How am I going to have some time to work on this? And Siren was really clear that it takes time. And I'm so in admiration of her her library's commitment to the professional growth of their staff by giving them time each week to look at it. It's big because it absolutely describes the different stages in full. So as I got to really look at Te Tautara in its entirety, I began to feel more comfortable with it because it really articulated very clearly what do those levels look like. That's why it's so big. So that was something that I realized. I love that the roots are part of the foundation. And I looked at the roots really carefully, and a lot of my thinking is around how will school librarians relate to this? I was saying how school librarians are all different. We have some schools that have no school librarian. They might have a school library, but there's no one dedicated to looking after that place. I was working in a school just 2 weeks ago. There is no school librarian. They have 2 enthusiastic teachers who after school, before school, and I was working with them in their vacation time, work in the library. Some schools have the office worker do Friday afternoons in the library. Some schools have full-time librarians and have library teams. So it's all very different. So I was thinking, how am I going to talk to school librarians in general about this without scaring them with this huge document? So I was thinking, what are the roots and how does it relate to education right now? And for those of you in education, you'll know, and you may have heard on the news about the curriculum refresh. Every single curriculum area in New Zealand at every level, primary and secondary school and intermediates, is going through a refresh. And they really needed to, because one of the things that people have come to realize is the curriculum was not acknowledging that our country is bicultural. It was not acknowledging that we needed to honour our obligations to the Treaty of Waitangi. And it really was, Siren was talking about that some people weren't even, you didn't need to even acknowledge where your roots were. If you looked at the curriculum, sometimes it wasn't even there. Nothing Te Ao Māori was there, nothing to acknowledge our nation as a bicultural nation. That's changing with the curriculum refresh. So for me, when I talk to school librarians, I just talk about how the curriculum refresh is what their teaching colleagues are working through right now. And many, many schools are doing some amazing work on the curriculum refresh to help their staff come up to speed with that. I had a quick screenshot of how the Treaty of Waitangi, so looking at the soil, I'm so glad you talked about that, Siren. And this is what it looks like in the framework. And you can see there's something missing on the screen, and that's the conversation, the kōrero stage. And it's kind of, I thought that was something, again, that was a little bit missing. But the good news is in the workbook, it does acknowledge that kōrero is there. Now, I like that Kapiti Library has done its own version of the workbook, and I would not go to schools with both of these huge documents. When I did approach a school just recently with it, I spoke to a wonderful full-time librarian who had a library team. And I sent the whole framework and whole workbook to her ahead of time. And I was so surprised at her response. She came rushing out and she said, I love this. I love that there's a whakatauki at every single stage. I love that it's free. I love everything about it. I thought she was going to say to me, this is far too big. What do you think you're doing to me? This is just too enormous for us. But what it did for her was it meant that, because their school was looking at the curriculum refresh as a whole school. and included the library team. And some of her team were really struggling with this whole idea of why should I even, as a school librarian, be involved in this? And she was able to use this framework to go, where are we at with this? How do you feel personally? And it totally became non-judgmental. The pressure came off all the conversations, and it just said, this is part of our country. Where are we at with this? And it asked questions. So what she found that was so empowering about that particular aspect of Te Totara was it was the invitation to think about where you're at yourself and then go and get involved as much as you can. Again, for schools, how do ethics and come into it? Obviously, every school has a code of ethics. And I think all librarians need to be aware of what professional practices and ethics. But for schools, the context is key. And for schools, that's your mission statement. That's every school has a mission statement, a goal, a value, and school libraries need to serve that, need to make that successful in the school. And so I would challenge school librarians to know that really well and to get involved in that. And the other thing that all of these curricula are being worked out is that every school not only has the national curriculum, but they have to say how their particular school is interacting with it. And school librarians may not be involved in the discussion about how they interact, but they certainly have to resource it. So that's a whole nother level of that context. The branches relate to school librarians again, and this is where we can get caught up, and I'm really, really thrilled that Te Totara starts with the roots, because I think sometimes when we think about what is my job, we think about the branches immediately without thinking about how holistic this is. What I like about this framework is it's incredibly holistic. It's saying, where are we as librarians in New Zealand? And how are we relating to this in our professional growth? So being a capability facilitator and looking at a capability framework had me a bit concerned, because I thought, goodness, do we cover any of this? But all of these branches do relate to school librarianship. And here's just one. So obviously the literacies, references and research services branch, that speaks to a lot of the kaupapa that school librarians are involved in, particularly in high school, but also emerging in primary school. It's digital literacy and dexterity, knowing what it is to be a digital citizen. It's about literacies and learning, information, reference services and research and evidence. Lots of powerful work that goes on in schools there. And again, just to give you a glimpse, that's covered in the framework very specifically. And you can see you get an understanding that that's why the framework's so large. It really articulates those different areas. And that's why the workbook is so large, because again, it invites you to think of where you're at. So I wouldn't go to schools with the whole workbook. I would think very carefully and work with schools and my team and SLANZ is very keen to look at Te Totara carefully too, to think about how can we in a way bring it to a level that you can get a quick understanding of what the whole process is, what the framework is, what it invites you to do, and then apply it in your school. Just a quick chat about the falling leaves aspect. Until the equity decision last year, school librarians quite probably weren't even appraised. If they were appraised as an office staff member or as a teacher. When I had my first appraisal as a teacher librarian, they wanted to appraise me as a teacher. And it had no reference to what I was doing in my library or in my role as a teacher librarian. So what I did with my workplace was I used the bodies of knowledge from Lianza to try and explain all the things that a librarian does. I feel that Te Totara, it brings the opportunity to say to your line leader, look at my professional growth. This is where I feel I'm at. this is where I'm progressing. And the other thing school librarians quite often need to do is an annual report to the board. And I think part of the report could very much include the work that that person's done using Te Totara on their professional growth. So my key takeaways about Te Totara, I'll stop sharing. Thank you for listening to that very long-winded discussion about school librarians. My key takeaway and why I like Te Totara so much is it's very invitational. It's got very few barriers to involvement. You can find yourself in a profession in a forest of totara trees, and we don't all come to that forest fully formed at all. We don't all come to that forest with maturity and with understanding in every area of librarianship. And it just says, where are you at right now and where would you like to grow? And then it clearly articulates what that will look like once you've done that growing. So that's one of my key takeaways about Te Totara, and why I'm very excited about the whole framework for our profession and for school librarians. Thanks, Carla.
Ngā mihi nui korua for your presentations today. Have been very much appreciative, particularly your own personal reflections of dealing with Te Totara within your organisations, as it is the practical side of things that a lot of us are always wanting to be a bit more aware of, and to get a bit of an inkling of how you work through those within your own organisations. So I'd like to take this opportunity now to open the floor if there are any questions. We have, looks like around about 10-15 minutes to take any questions. Just to make things easier, it'd be great if you could put them in the chat, just due to the amount of people that are here. But do also feel free, I'd say put your hand up, but my screens aren't quite big enough to cover all the people that are in attendance today. So if you do have any questions, please put those in the chat and we will endeavour to answer those. Always like to give people a couple of minutes because everyone is like, take it in, think about it before we answer any questions. I know one question that came up, and I know, Siren, you were basically investigating this. I know something that has come up is around whether or not Kapiti would be able to share their one pager that they developed with regards to Te Totara.
Yes, kia ora. It's a goodie. I'm not surprised there's an interest in it. So currently the situation is that we have created one bespoke to Kapiti and we're trialing it to see how it goes. So if you are interested in learning more about that, could I encourage you to contact Ian Littleworth of Kapiti Libraries to discuss sharing that document.
Ian, are you happy for us to put your, or are you happy to put your email address in the chat so people can get in contact with you? I did see your name in there. Oh, lovely. Thank you very much for that, Ian. So if you haven't got it open, Ian has just popped his email address into the chat. If you do have an interest in furthering those discussions on getting your hot little hands on that lovely little one pager that Kapiti has developed.
If there is a moment of silence, Carla, I just wanted to add something I didn't touch on with our one pager is that it has actions that you follow through on the final page. So you, and we're talking about that sort of being a beginner kōrero or at a mātou wisdom point. The one pager asks you to identify one of your areas that you're highly skilled in. But it doesn't ask you just to identify it. It then says that you could share with the team in some way. And I love that challenge of, oh, you've identified you're an expert in this area. how can we share that amongst the team? It just is a nice sort of juicy, holistic, team-based approach. And in the same sense, it asks you to identify those areas that you're just starting on and how you can get started.
Siren, I'm sorry about jumping in about questions, but one of the things I liked about Te Totara was that it wasn't connected with pay and it wasn't connected with appraisal in general, but with your Kapiti Library situation, is that part of an appraisal process, or is it just simply looking at how can I grow as a librarian?
I think this is one of the real challenges as a manager when you're doing performance reviews or discussions with people, is that some people challenge you and say, well, I can go through this process, but is it going to result in a pay rise? And there's a tricky question to answer, right? This Te Totara framework is not linked in any way to pay. It is linked to your personal development, your satisfaction, your fulfillment in the job. And I would say that that's the place it should sit. It's we do have a formal council, much more kind of rigid, matrixy kind of assessment to do with full-time staff, and that one is more likely to feed into remuneration. This Te Totara is a conversation. It's a chance for managers to sit down and really eyeball their people and have a genuine connection point with them to discuss where they're at.
Simona, hopefully I'm going to answer your question, which is around how it was developed. I assume you are asking around how Te Totara came about in development. So back in the day, in the grim dark days of COVID, the government had put together a package for libraries specifically, and it allocated around $60 million. Now, a part of that went to the secondees within the library sector, as there was an alarming notice that there were people whose jobs were disappearing due to funding crunches. So beyond that, National Library, who was the main, I guess, they were the ones who were allocating and they were looking after the fund that had been given from the New Zealand government. They had put in for 2 pieces of work to basically be done. And one of those pieces of work was the workforce capability. And this had come about because the sector itself had asked for this as well. So they had gotten in touch, they'd gone out to a tender process, and it happened to be Inspire Group was the group that took on the project of developing this workforce capability framework. Because it was recognised we didn't really have anything that was specific to libraries within New Zealand. And I do need to make that stipulation because there are other workforce capability frameworks internationally, but within New Zealand, we needed something that was much more specific to us, particularly as we have foundational documents like Te Tiriti o Waitangi, which does impact how things happen within our organisations and our institutions. So as you would have seen when I talked about it, when they were starting to develop this framework, they did a lot of work with engaging with the sector, within the organisations within the sector, to give them feedback as they slowly developed Te Totara into the iteration that it is now. One of the things that we will say is that it's like any document, it's not set in stone. It's like anything, there will be a degree of flexibility, and that's in how you would perhaps apply it or implement it. Or use it within your organisation. So we've been very blessed today in that, Siren has talked about the challenges that they had with implementing this within their practical organisation, which is like anything. It was great. We've actually been able to get practical advice and feedback on what works and what doesn't work for a particular organisation. And then, as you heard from Amanda, looking at how it could be utilised within a different space. And that was always going to be a challenge because even though we are small but mighty, there are a lot of differences across the sector. But I think the one thing that a lot of us can agree on is when you look at the bottom part of the tree, so looking at TY, looking down to the roots, and as Siren herself alluded to, looking at the whenua that tree is planted within, those apply across all of our sectors. There's no difference in those spaces. We have the same values. We have the same need to to work with our communities, to help our communities. The differences come about really around those capabilities and how we then apply those, because they are different depending on what sectors you work in. You know, as an example, if you're working within the backroom and you're not having interactions with the public, you know, your interactions are more than with the staff or with your colleagues that you work with, which is really different to your interactions with the people that you would come across at the front of desk, your general public who are coming into your spaces. So again, that's kind of why it's as big as it is. But I think as individuals, everyone would have the opportunity, and the documentation is there, to break it down and even just focus on the areas that you feel that you want to focus on within your organizations. And they've got that really cool matrix there of how you can judge yourself. And I think one of the things I was appreciative from both Siren and Amanda is the fact that they talked about the non-judgmental aspects of this. It's not about, you know, cracking a whip or saying, oh no, you're not good at this. It's around opening that conversation and that dialogue in a non-judgmental and safe space for everyone to be able to interact and engage with the process. So I hope I answered that for you, Simone. Any other pārtai? Gonna give it one more minute, and if they, oh, yep, lovely. It's always good when I'm told I've answered a question. I'll give it one more minute, but if we don't have any other pārtai, then I will close us off with the karakia, and if you're not already, you can go off and have your lunch. Give one more minute. Something that we would like to work on with regards to linking up the Workforce Capability Framework Te Tūtara with Leanne's, particularly with regards to bodies of knowledge and professional registration. It's like anything, it takes time and people, and to a certain extent, but not a huge part, pūtea as well. So that is something that is in the back of our minds. And as I said earlier, for me, I don't see them as competing. I see them as complementary.
I think right now you can, when you're doing a revalidation, there's places in the journal that you could talk about your professional growth using Te Totara. I could see that happening very clearly. And like Carla was saying, the conversations have started.
Unless there are any other pārtai or questions, I will call our session to the end. I'd just like to take this opportunity once again to thank the beautiful wahine who presented with me today, Amanda Bond and Siren Deluxe, for sharing their own personal insights and experiences of working with Te Tūtara. Leanza for ably hosting us in this webinar for today. This will be made available at a later date on YouTube. And also, if you are wanting those presentations, if you reach out to Angie or Anna, they can get in contact with us and we can see about making those available as well. So just to finish us off, I will close us with a karakia. Inuhia, inuhia. Inuhia ki te uripapa nui, kia wātea, kia māma, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua i te ara takatā, koe rā e rongo, whakairia ake ki runga, kia tina, tina huie tākie. Kia ora rā, everyone.
Okay, all good. Oh.